Okay, hi, this is your captain speaking. My name is Ross, and today we are talking about the Feynman technique. This comes from Nobel Prize winning physicist and all round interesting dude Richard Feynman. Its basic premise is, in order to really understand something, you need to be able to explain it in simple terms. So we can kill two birds with one stone here. One, we help you better understand something for your studies, and two, we get you writing about your subject in plain English, which is key to good scientific writing. So let's walk through the technique in 3 steps. 1. Choose a topic from your studies that you want to improve your understanding of, and write an explanation of it. 2. If you find there are parts of the subject you can't fully explain, that means you've identified a gap in your knowledge. So now you look up the information that you need to complete your explanation. Then you complete it. 3. Redraft your explanation while imagining you're writing it for a friend or family member who has zero knowledge of the subject. When you read your explanation back to yourself, imagine what that friend or family member wouldn't understand and which questions they would ask. Then redraft your explanation so they don't have to ask those questions. The rationale behind all this is that if you can break a subject down to explain it in simple terms, you understand it on a fundamental level. So let's take a look at some example explanations dealing with the conservation of energy in classical physics. First, from the Encyclopaedia Britannica. So ... principle of physics according to which the energy of interacting bodies or particles in a closed system remains constant. The first kind of energy to be recognised was kinetic energy, or energy of motion, in certain particle collisions called elastic, and blah 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 blah. Now, if you know physics, that will be no problem, but if you don't, you're going to have questions. What are interacting bodies? What exactly is a particle? What do you mean by a closed system? What's an elastic collision? And so on. So another way to look at this is that someone could easily memorise that passage, but never really fully understand the conservation of energy. Now, when Richard Feynman explained the same principle, he used an analogy, which I'm going to paraphrase. So, picture a mother cleaning up building blocks in her son's bedroom. Her son has 31 building blocks, but she can only find 28. So she knows there must be another 3 somewhere. And eventually she finds them under the bed. On another day she finds 40 building blocks, 9 more than her son has. So she knows those extra blocks came from somewhere else. And she remembers that the previous day her son's friend came over to play, so those blocks must be his. Okay, let's now blow your mind with the moral of the story. Those 31 blocks represent a closed system. Just as the amount of energy in a closed system remains constant, so does the number of blocks. If we find fewer blocks one day, we know some must be somewhere else. Just as if we have less of a type of energy one day, we know the overall amount of energy remains the same, but some must be in a different form. So maybe kinetic energy has become gravitational potential energy. And if we have more blocks one day, we know they must have come from somewhere else. Just as if we have more energy overall, we know some must have come from outside of the closed system. So, to make your explanation simple, you might do what Richard Feynman did and use an analogy. Or you could use examples. For instance, you could explain the conversion of kinetic energy into gravitational potential energy and vice versa by talking about a seesaw. And you should always use simple terms. If you use technical terms, you have to explain them in this task. Okay, let's flip reverse it and look at how not to do this task, with 2 of the most common mistakes that students make. So the first is using technical terms and jargon with no explanation at all, and these would be terms that anybody outside of your field would never understand, never in a million years. Secondly, another mistake is using formulas and or equations. And this is probably the most common crutch that students rely on. Remember, you're supposed to imagine you're explaining your topic to someone who knows nothing about the field. So this is someone who's never going to understand an equation about the field. So you cannot rely on the maths to do your explanation for you. Similarly, if you're in a field like computer science, you can't, for example, just rattle off a bunch of code to someone who doesn't have the first clue what an anchor tag is. Now, if you want some inspiration on how to explain things simply, you could have a look at Explain It Like I'm 5 on Reddit. There you'll find simple explanations on all manner of different topics. Now, if there are any questions, either shoot me an email or ask me in class. Otherwise, cheers, and I'll see you in the next lesson.